and we were treated in the worst way that any human being should be treated. And nobody in this world should go through what I went through and what the hostages are going through. And if we don't hurry and get them out as soon as possible, we're going to get bodies.
What was it like to actually be kidnapped by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, 2023, with your husband, dragged into Gaza, into those terror tunnels, and try to survive? Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg, co-founder of the Joshua Fund with my wife, Lynn, and co-host of this Inside the Epicenter podcast. And today, we're going to interview, for Lynn's and my first time, have a conversation with an actual Israeli hostage. She was a hostage. She was released in the hostage/prisoner swap in late November 2023. She spent about 2 months in captivity, and her husband is still there. And we're going to talk to her. It's a very sobering conversation, and I just want to sort of prep you for that right up front. But Lynn, great to be with you. We're here in Washington. We've been having all kinds of meetings, including Joshua Fund board meetings and some time with your family who live in the Washington, D.C. area. But we got this invitation to come and meet Aviva Seigel and her daughter, one of her 4 children. We'll talk more about after the conversation about some of your reactions, but could you just sort of set the stage for everyone? What was that like, just coming to sit with the two of them, and sort of how were you processing all that?
Yeah, it was a surprise and really an honor to have an opportunity to meet them. Aviva is originally South African, but her husband, Keith, who is still a hostage in Gaza, is an American citizen and grew up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. His 90-plus-year-old mother just passed away the very beginning of this week as we're recording it.
Yeah,
97.
Yeah.
97, yeah. She passed away, and so they came as a family from Israel to sit Shiva and to be there during the family time in North Carolina. And then they really believed that it was so important to come to Washington while they're in the States and to try to make connections in the U.S. government, especially as they're making a transition, into the new Trump administration. It was very striking to sit down. I think the first thing you asked her was, what is her message or what's her purpose? And she said, I just came here to scream for attention. She just said she feels like her words have not landed. They have not been remembered, and that she fears that the hostages are being forgotten.
Yeah.
So, to sit with them. So they just rented an Airbnb in the Northern Virginia area so that they could easily get into the city and try to make as many connections with the media, with the political world here in DC as they can.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Most people don't realize that there have been 7 American hostages held as part of this. Some of them have passed away. Some have been released, but I think we're at 3 currently. And this is our first time. You and I have had the opportunity, the honor really, of sitting with a lot of hostage families, interviewing them, praying for them, hearing their stories, trying to share both on this Inside the Epicenter podcast, as well as on All Israel News and on the Rosenberg Report and in speeches and panels and everything we've done all over the United States and all over. But this is our first time to sit with a woman who was a hostage and has been released. Now, it's not that the released hostages or the rescued hostages aren't talking to the press, but they talk a little bit soon after they get out, and then they all seem to need to go quiet. Like, just they don't want the attention, but they do want to draw attention, not to themselves and their stories, but to the plight of those who are left behind. So just giving the audience some context, there's something called the Hostage Family Forum. Would you describe what that is and how we met them in December? And then last year of 2023 with the delegation, and then we'll go into the conversation with Aviva Seigel.
Sure. Yeah. The Hostage Family Forum was created so that the people who are the relatives and friends as well, close friends and boyfriends, girlfriends, fiancés, everyone connected to people who were being held hostage in Gaza, so that they had a place where they could come together. It's near Tel Aviv, where they have offices, and it's just a beehive of activity, trying to share their story in every possible platform, every possible way, whether it's through right around the corner is Hostage Square, what's been dubbed Hostage Square. It used to be mainly a square where there are museums and theaters, but now it's a place of memorial where ever since the hostages have been taken, there's a constant presence of people there, art installations, photographs, people there in order to just keep the hostages at the forefront of people's minds. And so this family forum, we got connected to them when we were planning the evangelical delegation, really a solidarity mission in December of last year, just before Christmas. A wonderful group of Christian leaders, including the now newly designated by President Trump U.S. ambassador to Israel. Governor Mike Huckabee was the co-leader of that trip. And it was during that time that those connections were made, and we were able to begin to meet with some of these families and to be there at their headquarters and to be in Hostage Square, and then to go with them to various sites as well. So that connection has been continued since then in order for you to help them in whatever way we can. And so, yeah, to get this message, that they knew that you were in DC, and they reached out to say that Aviva and her family were here as well, and it would be a good thing to connect with them. So we were very glad to do that.
Very honored. And I just want to say again, for Lynn and me, we've had a lot of firsts over this past, as you and I record this, it's 429 days that these hostages have still been held. And we think there's about 101 hostages that are still in Gaza. Israeli intelligence says, they think about half of them are still alive. The other half are still are bodies that need to be brought back, but we don't really know. And so we've got to keep praying. So let's get right into this conversation, but all of it's emotional. And if you're listening to this podcast with children in the car, just use your own discretion as what you think is age appropriate. It's not graphic mostly, although there are a few moments that are pretty bad, but mostly just it's the emotional horror of what we're about to hear, this story. And she doesn't tell it. We don't ask it in chronological order. We sort of deal with different pieces of it, but she'll tell, eventually she'll tell how she and her husband were captured that day, but also what they endured. That's the biggest part of what they've endured, and how hard she's trying to do everything she can to get Keith and all of the hostages back. So let's begin. In a little bit, we'll need to take a break, and we'll do that. When we come back from the break, I'll share some scriptures, some prayer requests, and we'll go into the second half of the conversation. But here's the first half of Lynn's and my conversation with former Israeli hostage Aviva Seigel for this Inside the Epicenter podcast. Aviva, what an honor to meet you. Thank you for being willing to talk to us and tell us your story.
Well, I'm sitting here in the United States, near Washington, D.C., where all the important decisions happen, trying to scream. It just doesn't seem right that these American hostages, one of them is my husband Keith, that's 65 years old, that was taken with his pajamas from his house, underneath the ground, in a tunnel that's dark, that's hot, that you don't have any oxygen. And to think that Keith is still there for a year and 2 months is too much, just too much. I went through too much in 51 days. There wasn't a minute for me just to relax. I was scared all the time. I was threatened so many times. I was sick. And the worst thing for me was to see when they brutally treated Keith, when they brutally treated the girls with us. That was the hardest, that I couldn't protect them. When I wanted just to scream and I had to close myself and try not to feel. because it was just, I felt like my whole heart is going to explode whenever they did that. And we were treated in the worst way that any human being should be treated. And nobody in this world should go through what I went through and what the hostages are going through. And if we don't hurry and get them out as soon as possible, we're going to get bodies. Just like Hirsch, the American hostage that came back. And, you know, the whole world has heard about Hirsch because he's American. The conditions that he was in a tunnel that they couldn't even stand. Couldn't even stand their body. There was only room for 2 people out of the 6 to lay down. It was just so small. I was there. I've been talking about those tunnels for a year since I've come back. And it just seems like my words like vanish into people's hearts because nothing has happened. I don't understand how humans in this world, any human, could let people suffer like they're suffering. And I always say that if I wasn't there and I wouldn't have told my story, we could think that maybe they treated it in a better way. But I was there. Mm-hmm. I felt. I nearly died so many times. And it's the worst thing that anybody in this world should go through. It's not an ordinary jail. It's with terrorists that think that they're the kings of the world and they can eat while they starve you, not bring you water while they drink water. I had an infection in my stomach. For most of the time I was in Gaza. I was so sick and I couldn't show them that I'm sick because I was scared that they would kill me. I was taken underneath the ground with Keith and another girl, and we nearly suffocated there. There was no oxygen for us at all. And I remember one of the days that Keith looked at me and he looked like somebody that has not got any oxygen. And I was scared to even watch his chest go up and down because that's what happened to us. We felt like we're going to die. And I said to Keith, just lie down and try and breathe. And that's all we did. We couldn't talk, we couldn't whisper, we couldn't move, we couldn't sit. We had to lie down and try and breathe. While, you know, unfortunately everybody's got a head on their shoulders, and then comes the thinking, what's going to happen? Who's going to die first if I'm going to see Keith dead? What is it going to be like? What am I going to feel like while I'm dying? While I'm dying slowly? Because I felt like I'm dying. And I'm lucky and Keith is lucky that we got out of that tunnel. And I'll never ever forget that first minute of breathing the air, even though the air was dirty because it wasn't a clean air, because it's just like that in Gaza. And I remember taking my first breath into my lungs and feeling how lucky I am. And it was like I was born again.
Just to be clear, do you mean that this is when you got released?
No,
but you're saying they moved you. So
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit of that, because where did they move you to?
Yeah.
And do you know what tunnels, what city you were in when you were in a tunnel?
Keith and I were moved 13 times.
13 times.
13
Wow.
times. And one of the times they took us to this huge big building, and there was a truck of the UN outside, so it seemed like it belonged to the UN. Because in the beginning, when you walked like in front of the door, there were sandals of all different sizes, like children's, all the way up to grown-ups. And when we walked in, we saw that building had a lot of money. You know, the taps where I went to wash my hands in the bathroom, and there was water. It was one of the places that there was water.
Okay.
It was like covered with gold.
Really?
And that's how much money was put into that building. There were like drapes that were beautiful, and the furniture was just so pretty. I felt like I walked into a place with a king and a queen. That's how beautiful it was. But that was only for 24 hours while they moved Keith and I and put us to lay down on a filthy, dirty mattress on the floor. And we weren't allowed to even whisper. We weren't allowed to move. And we were starved for those whole 24 hours All we got was a piece of chocolate and a little piece of cheese for the whole 24 hours, while they ate in front of us. These terrorists used to eat in front of us while they starved us.
Was it always the same
No.
terrorists that were with you, or different people were accompanying you? No, I just wondered if they were always with the same terrorists, or they were moved from person to person also.
No, I tried to count how many terrorists I met in Gaza. I think I met at least 45 terrorists that treated us like we're not human beings.
Oh.
They threatened us, they starved us, they hit us. They pushed Keith, and they broke Keith's ribs when they took us from Gaza. They shot us. You know, there's bullets on the floor on my house while they tried to shoot me. So I'm lucky, and Keith was lucky.
To be alive.
But what saved our lives is Keith put his head on his knees and his hands on his head. And when they picked him up, they tore his shirt, and I was scared all the time that I will die all the time.
Just to be clear, you mean that because he went into I'm a prisoner mode and didn't try to resist or anything else, that then you think they decided, okay, he'll be a hostage as opposed to just shooting him right there?
Yes, because all my neighborhood from the way forward where I live, always killed, always kidnapped. So I'm Brodat, is a neighbor. I'm Smadar and Idanwell. Avigail was taken, and I'm Mishpachat Goldstein. Well, they took the 4 people and they killed the father and the daughter in front of them, and all the rest. Most of them they just shot. They killed them.
When former governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, who will now be the new U.S. ambassador to Israel, he and Lynn and I hosted a delegation of evangelical Christian leaders, and we went to Kfar Aza, and we took Huckabee and the others house by house. Mike Huckabee has been to Israel 100 times, and he said, I've never seen anything like this. He was so sickened, but we have not yet met until now somebody who was actually taken hostage from Kfar Aza. It's such an honor to meet you.
Is it Kfar Aza that neighborhood that was the grandparents, and then there was it was all the young people, right?
There was lots of young
Be'eri
people.
was the grandparents' neighborhood, but it was Kfar Aza that was the young people's neighborhood.
That was the closest to the
that
fence
was right
line.
next to the border there.
Yeah.
So, in a moment, would you take us through what happened for you on the 7th, and to you and Keith? But can we start with, you came to Washington, you said that right up front. You came to Washington because you're to scream, to try to cry out, to get attention. What is your message to President Biden and to incoming President Donald Trump?
I've met President Biden 3 times, and he's brilliant. He's brilliant. He's got a heart of gold, and every time I came, I could feel how much he knows Keith and wants Keith out, and how happy he was to see me. And I know that he really opened his heart for all the hostages, the American hostages, and is trying to do everything he can, but Keith isn't here yet, and it's 1 year and 2 months. And we came to United States to push, to cry, to talk out aloud for Keith and all the hostages, the girls that I was with, and the hostages from Kfar Aza and all the hostages, because they're not here. And what they're going through hell. And they do not deserve to be in a place like that with so much evil that's there. And so we decided to come here to try and push and talk to anybody that will help us. I'm begging. I can't wait. I just can't wait for Keith to come home. And I want to tell you that I'm scared. I'm just so scared of what can happen. Because we've heard about Hirsch that came back in such bad condition. So I don't know. I don't know how they're treating Keith. I just am holding my fingers and trying to keep my hope and keeping strong for my family, for my daughters, for my grandchildren, for Keith's family. And we just can't wait for it to happen.
What was your reaction to President-elect Trump's statement that he put out saying if the hostages are not out by the time he takes office, I think they will be all hell to pay, or something close to that effect. That was quite a threat. I'm just, what's your reaction? And have you had a chance to meet him yet?
No, I haven't met Trump yet, but I'd love to meet him. I'd love to tell him what I went through, because I want to wake him up and tell him that he needs to do it as soon as possible. And I'm happy that he's maybe going to be strong enough to get them out, because we need somebody that's strong enough to win the evil. The good has to win, because the good is what we've been born for. We came to life to enjoy life and not to be taken in our pajamas. Keith is an American citizen that's underneath the ground, that I'm sure that he's crying all the time and felt like he's forgotten and doesn't know if he'll ever get out of Gaza alive, because I was there and that's what I thought.
Wow. What's been your reception? You've been speaking to members of Congress, the members of the press. What kind of reaction are you getting since you've arrived in Washington?
You know, you asked me about Washington, but I want to tell you that all over the world, people, good people, most people, want this world to be a good world. And Keith and I are peacemakers, and we want good for everybody. We want good for all the people that live in Israel. And we've always been that kind of people. And Keith is just the most sweetest, loving person in earth. Everybody loves him. You know, we were inside the tunnel, and the girls just adored him. He just helped in every way he could.
So just to be clear, there were some times you were able to talk as a group, but there were some times you were told you can't move, you can't whisper even.
Yeah, when we were taken after maybe four and a half weeks underneath the ground to a tunnel, I'd forgotten how to talk, because I hadn't spoken for weeks. And I remember like sitting and looking at Keith, and I said to myself, I can talk. I can talk to Keith. And I felt lucky, but we didn't have enough strength to talk, because all we did was try to breathe.
Wow.
And that's what we did. So we had to keep completely and utterly quiet mostly all the time. They played with us. They used to like tell us we had to get dressed like Arabs, like nearly at least once a day. And like at 3 o'clock in the middle of the night, they used to tell us to sit next to the wall, like next to each other, and just wait. Well, we just wanted to lie down. And Keith, with his ribs broken, used to beg them to lie down just for 5 minutes to relax his body. He was in such pain. And with a half a smile, they used to say no.
Just taunting.
I just don't understand things like that.
But there were some times that you guys were in some location that you were able to talk to the other hostages that you were around?
Some of the places, but only some of the places. Most of the time we had to keep quiet. The first week we were allowed to talk, not all the time, but we did talk. And then after a week we had to keep quiet. Sometimes we were allowed to whisper. And in one of the houses that we were there for quite a short, not such a short while, they used to lock us in a small room, all of us.
So how many was it, a group of you?
We were five. And we had 3 mattresses for the 5 of us, while Keith had his ribs broken, so we gave him one mattress, and because nobody could even touch him. And everybody was wounded.
It's so painful.
Everybody was wounded. Some had fingers that were broken and shots inside their bodies.
So what type of reaction are you getting here in Washington? Do you feel like you're being listened to? You're being heard? Is your message getting out there?
I feel like I want to do everything I can. I feel like, I don't want to go to sleep even. I want to just talk and talk even for 24 hours, just for something that'll happen already. Because that's the only thing I do. For the last year, I've been talking and crying with my family, with my daughters and Keith's family. And all we do is talk and cry. And I do feel that there's so many people that listen to me and cry with me and hug me and feel for me and feel for Keith and for the hostages. But I do know that Keith isn't here. He's not here. He's there, underneath the ground. So I don't know what more to do.
Yeah.
I'd love somebody to tell me what to do, because I am prepared to go and change Keith for him to get out. I'm prepared to stay in Gaza just for Keith to get out.
To switch him out. To replace yourself with him. Wow. I want to go into your story about what happened on the 7th, but I also want to say one thing. We're sitting with your lovely daughter. I met one of your sons, but we read an article, Lynn and I, on the way here, that you were told, or at least you thought, maybe you can clarify, that all of your children had been killed.
No, the son, just your son.
Or that your son had been killed on the 7th, sorry.
Because he was there. He was the only one in Gaza at the time.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
I'll tell you the
remember.
story about Shai.
Okay.
But maybe you can ask Ilani some things too. Okay. So on the 7th, while Keith and I were sitting in our little bomb shelter, Shai wrote to us, my son, that's 40 years old, that lives on Kibbutz Kfar Aza, and that must have been maybe at 8:30 or something like that.
So all of it began around 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah, it started at 6:30 in the morning, and Shaiki wrote to us that he's holding his fingers, that he can hear Arabic outside. And we got disconnected. And I was sure that they killed my son. I was 100% sure that they killed my son. And the whole time in Gaza, couldn't believe it, that I don't have a son. And Keith is still there, not knowing that his son is alive. And when I came back from Gaza, then we were in this bus with the social worker, and I hadn't met my family yet or heard anything about them. And I started crying, and she came up to me and she asked me if I'm okay. And I said, no, I'm not okay, because I'm going to meet my 3 daughters without my son, and I won't be able to handle it. I'm going to faint. And I really felt like that. I felt that I don't have Keith to lean on to go through something that's so traumatic for me, knowing that my son isn't around. And then she went, and after about 10 minutes she came to me and she said that you got 4 children. And I looked at her and I said, but can you tell me that my son's okay, he wasn't wounded, because I know that people were shot. And I was crying like a baby. And she said, sorry, I can't tell you if your son was shot. And I was shaking. I didn't know what condition my son is, but because, from knowing that he was dead and coming and to hear that he's alive, it was overwhelming. And then not knowing how he is. First of all, the only minute that I understood that I'm coming back to Israel is when I met the first soldier, because we were taken, the Hamas terrorists took us to the Red Cross, and from the Red Cross they took us to a place with lots and lots of from the Red Cross they took us to the soldiers. And
yes, we were all glued to television as they were giving live coverage of these vans with you all coming out, and we didn't know what condition you'd be all in.
Yeah, that was a really, 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 really hard day. Just everything about it, saying goodbye to Keith, not knowing where I'm going, what they're going to do to me, if they're going to rape me or take me or kill me.
You weren't told that you were being released?
I didn't.
Or you didn't believe them?
I didn't believe them. I didn't believe them because, first of all, it was like a shock. I'd never heard anything about people being released or me being or maybe being released. All I heard from them that Israel does not exist anymore, and that there's no Israel, and that we'll never ever go back to Israel.
That's so crazy.
Even that day, I was sitting in the van with Eli and Dafna, 2 children, one 8 and one 15, from Kibbutz Nahal Oz, and the terrorists were coming to the van and telling us that we're not going to Israel, we're going to Europe. And this little girl that's 8 years old, Ella, she started crying that she wants to go to her mother. And they asked them, where are their parents? And they said that the father's in a different car and the mother wasn't with them. And when they came to Israel, they were told that their father was killed. And you know that Daphna, I saw her telling me in such an exciting way and saying that she'll never ever forget when they connected her sister's finger, because it was disconnected. They took this little girl that's 8 years old to a vet and put sewed her finger with not putting any anesthetic, and they took her to a vet. So I felt like her sister that's 15 couldn't wait to tell like a grown-up what she went through. It was really, really, really something bad that happened to them. And that whole day was very hard. They brought this lady that I didn't know who she was or how old she was, but when I turned around, because they asked if anybody knows English, I turned around and I saw this old lady. Her feet were purple, blue, red, and her shirt was like up, so I could see she had signs on her back as if they hit her. And they told me to tell her in English to pick her head up, but she didn't, because she couldn't hear me. So I asked them to bring her and to sit her next to me. And they sat her next to me, and when I took her face to pick up her head, that she'd be able to breathe, I felt that she was cold like ice. And I asked for a blanket, because I said that if we won't put a blanket on her, she's going to die. She was cold. So I gave her some water, and I knew that she was alive. And then I started shouting that she needs to keep alive, that her family, her children and her grandchildren are waiting for her. And I massaged her all the time, massaged her body all the time, her legs and her body and her hands, and picked up her head. And I took like the blanket and I like folded it, that it'll hold her head, that it won't like fall. And when we came back to Israel, they told me that she survived, that her body temperature was 28 degrees, and the Hamas terrorist gave her 2 dates a day in 7 weeks and 2 days. And she is 84 years old. She was a half a year in hospital. And I just don't understand how people can treat human beings like that, because that's... And to think of Keith being there and being treated in that way, or just any way that I was treated, it's just the cruelest human thing that anybody can even think about.
Wow. Well, let's take a break there for a moment. We need to go to a break, and it'd be good to take a break, to catch our breath, process this. When we come back, I'll share some scriptures and some prayer requests specifically, and then we'll get back into the second half of our conversation with Aviva Seigel on this Inside the Epicenter podcast, a very special and moving edition episode. But hang on, we'll be right back. I just want to read a passage to put some of this in context. You've heard us use it before, but Isaiah 61, beginning in verse 1. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord. And this is, of course, the word of the Lord coming through the Hebrew prophet Isaiah, 700 years before the arrival of Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, the Savior of the world. But this is also the exact same passage that Jesus reads in the synagogue in Nazareth when he announces these words are coming true right before you. And of course, not anybody in the synagogue except Jesus' own disciples believe him, and it becomes a very dramatic moment at the beginning of his ministry. Welcome back to Inside the Epicenter. I'm Joel Rosenberg. This is Lynn Rosenberg. We're not only the co-hosts of Inside the Epicenter, but the co-founders of the Joshua Fund, which we began by God's leading and his mercies in the summer of 2006. We did not know 18 and a half years ago that just weeks after we signed all the papers and got the Joshua Fund to be a legal nonprofit in the United States, that a massive war, the Second Lebanon War, was going to break out between Hezbollah and Israel. And so here we are. It feels like full circle, Israel fighting in Lebanon against Hezbollah, and in the south against Hamas. There is a ceasefire that's mostly holding in Lebanon right now, but of course, fighting continues in Gaza, and we're still trying to get those hostages out. So, in a moment, I want to pick up on this moving and emotional conversation that Lynn and I had the other day with Aviva Seigel, the wife of Keith Seigel, both of them taken hostage on October 7th, 2023. And then she was released in late November of 2023 in the hostage exchange. Hamas released a number of hostages, women and children and the elderly, though not all of those. And then Israel released a number of Palestinian prisoners, and there was a brief temporary ceasefire. But her husband, Keith, is still held hostage. And as we record this, we're 429 days in. And when she was released, when Aviva was released, more than a year ago, she had no idea that this would still be going on. And her grief is very palpable. But this is what we're asking the Lord right now. We're asking the Lord to bring good news to those who are afflicted, to bind up the brokenhearted, and to set these captives free, to bring freedom to these prisoners. Yes, the Lord means that spiritually, but he also meant this physically. He set free people who were prisoners of demon possession and prisoners of being lame and mute and blind, and he set people free in every possible way. And we know when we go through the book of Acts that we see Jesus setting his people free from prison at times. So this is what we're asking the Lord. Please set the captives free. And we'd ask you to be praying. That's the main prayer. Comfort for the families that have, and the hostages that have been released, but also courage for every family member and friend and the nation that have people that they love that are still being held captive, and asking the Lord, please, 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 set these captives free. We know God is sovereign and he can do this. We don't know why. I don't know why. Lynn does not know why this has gone on more than 429 days at this point. So it's very, very difficult. And right now, rather than trying to understand, well, why, I don't know that it's possible to understand why right now from God's sovereignty. Like, he could set them free and he hasn't set them all free. But let's go back to listening to someone he has set free, and grieve with her and listen. There's no words that we know how to explain, but just sometimes by sitting with people, listening to their story and sharing it with others and mobilizing others to understand what's really going on, how bad it really is, and to urge other people to pray as well. Sometimes that's what we're supposed to be doing. So let's go back to part 2 of our conversation, Lynn's and mine, with Aviva Seigel, one of the released hostages, who's desperately trying to do everything she can to urge the Biden administration in its final days and urge the incoming Trump team, please do everything you can to set my husband and all the captives free. So once you realized that you were looking at an Israeli soldier and you were entering Israel, what happened next? When did you get to see your family and particularly see your son?
So after we saw the soldier, then we were moved to like a bus with the social worker that told me that I've got 4 children. And then we were taken to some place where they gave us something to drink and let us talk to our children, to our family on the telephone. And you have to hear that. I'll show you. Maybe okay. I'll show you when we arrived to the hospital, and everybody came and hugged me, and we were crying.
Can you even describe? I'm sure it must be difficult the emotions, because they were so conflicting to everything else you'd known. For how many days were you held?
I was held for 51 days in Gaza. Okay. And
so what was that? Can you describe? Is it possible to describe what was going on in your heart and your head
You know that only a few hours before that, I knew that I'm getting out. It wasn't like days. Right. It was just a couple of hours that I knew that I'm going back home to Israel. So everything was like too much, because at the beginning, until I spoke to Shai, my son, and heard that he's okay, that he's alive, I was full of emotions, like thinking, how will I manage that without Keith?
Right.
So from the minute that I heard that Shai's alive and that he's okay, it was like not even an hour before I saw him. And to come from, thinking of somebody that's dead, and seeing him, I couldn't take my eyes off him. I just couldn't. I couldn't stop saying all the time to myself, I can't believe it, Shai's alive. I can't believe it, Shai's alive. I can't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. And I couldn't believe that I was in Israel. I couldn't believe that I was with my family. We spoke. I arrived in the hospital at 11 o'clock in the evening. And at 4:30, we said, okay, we need to lie down and go to sleep a little bit, because, I hadn't slept for hours. I didn't sleep in Gaza for the 51 days. I hardly slept, only for like 5-10 minutes there and there. And after an hour of sleeping, I got up, and my children, my girls, were in the room, in different beds, all of us. And I just stood there and stared at them. And I said, I can't believe it. I stood next to the bed of my daughters that were sleeping and stared at them. And I said to myself, I just can't believe it. I'm looking at Ilan, I'm looking at Shir, I'm looking at Gal. I just couldn't believe it that I'm looking at my children. And then I started crying like a baby. Everything was like, too much for me. And I walked out, and there were the nurses there, and I leaned on them a little bit. I couldn't hardly walk by myself. I was so fragile. I had to lean on somebody for the first day until I got back my strength.
How much weight had you lost during that time?
I lost 10 kilos, and I could feel my ribs were out, and it was strange. There's pictures of me. I don't look like myself. I was so thin, but I wasn't well at all. I could hardly eat and hardly drink. It took me a month and a half to take a plate like everybody and eat.
Well, because they were having to treat you for this stomach infection that had been so bad, right?
And you had
because
your stomach had shrunk.
Right.
Yeah, I ate hardly nothing in Gaza. Nothing. I used to hide food for Keith.
Okay, wow.
I used to take pieces of pita and put them in a tissue and hide them for Keith.
Wow. So let's then take a few more minutes. And I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you telling us your story. It's just, we've met, as I said to you before we started, we've met many hostage families and heard their stories, and including the aunt of the Bibas boys, and just such moving stories. But this is our first time actually meeting a survivor, or somebody who's come out, but hearing the pain of being out, but having a whole another year, more than a year now, of your husband still being there, it's a lot to process. Would you talk about the actual, so the line goes dead on October 7th, the connection's cut, you think that your son, Shai, is dead. What happens then that you and your husband, do they break into your house? What happens? And then just take us into those moments of being captured and then taken actually into Gaza. What was happening, and what was happening inside of you?
Yes, first of all, I want to tell you that I'm still in Gaza. I haven't come back from Gaza. I'm there all the time, thinking about Keith, thinking about the girls, thinking about what they went through, what Keith went through, what I went through, and sick to my stomach, knowing that they're still there. So the 7th, at 6:30 in the morning, we thought that it's just like an ordinary day with another missile, because we've had missiles for more than 20 years, and we used to run to the shelter. I used to hide behind trees, do you know? I used to hide behind trees to keep myself. I used to see the missiles coming towards Kfar Aza and hide behind trees for years.
It's become somehow normal,
Yeah, I used to, so many times of fear, I don't know. I just don't know how we handle.
I have to ask you just to break out for a moment. Why did you live in Kfar Aza? Is that where you're? I mean, and where are you from? You're from where originally?
Well, Keith and I have been living on Kibbutz Kfar Aza for more than 40 years. And Keith always used to say that if we leave Kfar Aza because of the missiles, who will stay? So we have to stay to look after that part of Israel. And that's Keith. He's a person that will give even his life for the country. He loves Israel. Keith is from North Carolina. He was brought up in Chapel Hill. His father was a professor of public health. So many people all over the States know him. And his mom, 97 years old, died just a couple of days ago.
Yes.
And I'll never forget Keith in Gaza saying that the first thing that he wants to do when he gets out of Gaza is to go and give his mama a hug. And it's going to be really, really bad. Like I say, I ask people when I talk, is there anybody that will want to be next to Keith when he asks questions? And I do not want to be next to Keith when he asks these questions. How did it take so long to get him out of there? And to tell him about his mom. So
and you're from South Africa?
I was born in South Africa.
Okay.
I came to Israel when I was 9 years old. Keith came to visit his brother on Kibbutz Gezer, and we met there. He was supposed to go back home and study, and he decided to stay.
You guys were teenagers when you met?
Yeah, I got married when I wasn't even 20 years old.
Wow.
I was a week before 20.
Wow.
And that was after being with Keith at least for a year before we got married. So we know each other we've been married for 43 years.
Wow.
So I know Keith for 45 years. I know Keith. And we lived on Kibbutz Sorah because that's where I was brought up on. And we looked for a younger kibbutz. So we went to live on Kfar Aza. And Kfar Aza is beautiful. I don't know.
Yes,
it's
it
beautiful.
is beautiful. I mean, it's hard for us. It's hard for us to separate it now because the first time I went with Ambassador Danny Danone and Boris Johnson and Scott Morrison, there weren't bodies, but there was still blood on the floors and, of course, the charred buildings and the bullet holes. And it seems like something out of a movie, and I couldn't that time see it as beautiful. I could only see and the smells and I've been back numerous times now, and over time I think, wow, I can see why people lived here. It was a beautiful, just same thing with Nahal Oz and the others. It's just gorgeous, actually, Be'eri, but at the first time we couldn't see it as beautiful.
That's fine.
What?
No, I was just saying it is. It's idyllic. It's like a paradise.
Yeah.
It's so peaceful.
Yeah, and Keith and I love fruit, so we've got lots of fruit trees outside the house. I think something like 13 trees. And, you know, they're left there. Nobody's taking care of them, I'm sure. All the oranges are going to fall. The best oranges that you can eat. The best. And
that's where you raised all 4 children who were brought up there at Kfar Aza.
yes, but only Shai was the only one that stayed there. And at the last years, Ilani, with her 3 children, she lived there on Kfar Aza with her husband. She had 2 children. And about 4 years ago, she decided that enough is enough. Maybe 5 years ago already. I forgot about the year in Gaza. And she,
8 years ago.
8 years ago?
Okay.
Okay. So she decided that she's not...
I was the smart one.
Yeah, she was a smart one, and she decided that she doesn't want to grow up her kids there going through what she went through. And it's just, it's very, very, very difficult growing kids there.
So let's get back to just taking a few minutes. You don't have to give us the whole story, but the actual moment of being captured, and then thinking, where are they taking me? Well, that whole process, I think it's very important for Christians, for everyone to hear what you really went through.
Okay, so it all started at 6:30 in the morning, and the first alarm, we ran to our shelter. We don't have any time to close the door or the window because normally there's not enough time when the missile leaves Gaza. Sometimes the explosion is close. Just when they say the alarm. So we ran. We didn't even close the door or the window. We just put ourselves down there. And then after 2, we thought it's finished. We didn't know that it's not finished, and we walked out, and we saw from the window all the missiles going all over the country to Tel Aviv, and you can hear the whistles. You can hear them before they leave the ground because it makes such a noise. But just think about it, that I, in Gaza, was in buildings that all these missiles got from that building while the building was shaking. I used to look at the ceiling and just say, no, don't let it fall on us now. And I used to count the cracks on the walls to see if the building will make it. So Keith and I, in the 13 times that we were moved, while we were upground, all the buildings we were in, the missiles came out. And you know the Hamas terrorists, they just stand and smile in front of us, clap their hands and say, beautiful. How could somebody do that? I just don't understand. And so Keith and I were sitting, we ran back, there was another bomb attack. So we ran and we closed the door and we closed the window. And then somebody on the WhatsApp group that I belong to wrote that you can hear noises that we've never heard before. And that was Hamas terrorists killing people. And then they said on the same WhatsApp group that Ophir Lipstein from Gaza was killed. So I remember looking at Keith in the eyes and saying to myself, I can't believe it. There's terrorists on the kibbutz and they're killing people. I just couldn't believe it. I was in a shock, in a complete and utterly shock. Keith was trying to help me and relax me while I was shaking. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And I told Keith, don't tell me anything bad on any WhatsApp group. I don't want to hear anything. I only want to hear from my children and my family, my sisters. And so Keith protected me and he didn't tell me much more. But we were sitting there and Shir, my daughter, wrote to us that we're the strongest people in earth. And that sentence that she wrote went straight into my heart like a knife. And I understood that something really bad is happening because we were disconnected from internet. So we didn't know what's happening. And nobody wrote to us what's happening. Ilani, my daughter, wrote to us that we need to keep on contact with her because she's very worried about us. And that I understood from that. But we didn't know anything. And we were sitting there and I'm holding Keith's hands and looking straight into his eyes and he's holding my hands. And we're just looking at each other and trying to figure out what's happening. And it felt like the end of the world. And then I said to him, we should sit in the shelter, that if they shoot us through the window, they won't hit us. And if they shoot us through the door, they won't hit us, because we thought that the door is locked. We didn't understand that it's not locked from the outside. And then we heard, and it just that you'll know that the girl that normally writes on the WhatsApp groups to all the people on the kibbutz what to do, because Gaza's been through so many attacks and so many whatever. And she was killed. She was murdered very shortly after it started. And
So you weren't
then
getting any updates from her?
no, not any
from anybody?
from nobody. We were just sitting and trying to understand what's happening. I was shaking. Keith was trying to calm me down. And then we heard the shooting coming closer and closer to the house, and the Arabs outside screaming and shouting, coming closer and closer. And I'll never forget that moment, looking at Keith in the eyes and telling him, they're here next to the door. We heard their steps. And then the door just opened. It made a big noise. I stood up and I started screaming. I never knew that any person can scream like I screamed. And what saved our lives is that Keith put his head on his knees and his hands on his head. And that saved our lives, because my whole neighborhood, all the way forward, was all murdered or kidnapped. And they took us in such a brutal way. They pulled Keith and tore his shirt, and they shot us, and they broke Keith's ribs, and they took us in Keith's car in such a brutal way, while the terrorist was sitting next to me with a knife in front of my face. And the terrorist in front was with a gun while the other one was driving. And on the way to Gaza, we saw lots of terrorists walking around on the kibbutz, and we saw houses on fire already. And in 2 seconds, we were in Gaza. I remember the people from Gaza babies, holding babies, young children, older people with sticks standing outside their houses and clapping hands, while Keith and I were shaking our lives. And then all the time for the first couple of days, used to say to myself, what am I doing in Gaza? What am I doing here? What am I doing here? I didn't fight with anybody. I just want good for all the people in Gaza too, for all the good people in Gaza that need to have a good life. You know that when I think about mothers having babies in tents, it breaks my heart. And when I think about older people in tents for 1 year and 2 months, nobody shouting for them. You know, I read today in the news that there was somebody from Gaza that he must have put it on the YouTube, that he's saying that they've had enough of Hamas. Hamas doesn't give them food to eat.
Yeah.
And you know that today it was written in the news that they killed him.
Really?
They killed him. That person was all over the world by saying, help us, we need help. We can't handle this anymore. And they killed him. Just because he wants good for his family and his children.
He just wants food. I mean, he's not even asking for freedom. He's just asking for food.
And Keith is such a peacemaker. You know that when he was about 35 years ago, he went to study a little bit of Arabic because there were people from Gaza working on the kibbutz. And he decided to learn Arabic because he wanted to welcome them when they come. And sometimes I remember him coming home late. I've got these babies. I've got 4 children at home and waiting for my husband. And where is Keith? Talking to somebody from Gaza in Arabic. Because he's that kind of person. He's just a sweetheart.
This is something that I think a lot of Americans, generally Christians also, and people around the world don't realize. Most of the people living in the Israeli side of that border were what we might call peaceniks. Like they believed, that it wasn't just to defend the border, but it was also because you believed there should be a 2-state solution. And when we don't have any problem with these neighbors. Let's make a deal. And so this was you. This is you and Keith and your family.
You know that when every time there were like wars and things like that, I used to say to myself, maybe we can like organize like blankets and clothes and food and whatever and just send it to Gaza. We're so close to Gaza. I used to think about them. I used to worry about them. My heart was broken for them, for the good people there. And I remember that they built houses on the kibbutz. And the people that built them were people from Gaza. And I used to bake them biscuits and bring them coffee. Not talk to them, but just bring them biscuits and bring them coffee.
Wow, that's amazing. So just a couple quick questions to close. Your story is so moving and it's so important. Well, first, what do you think about the people of Gaza now? Are you able to separate out this, okay, that was Hamas, but the rest of the people of Gaza are sort of trapped under them? Or do you feel, what do you, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm just curious, what do you think about Gaza and what do you think should happen when this war is over?
I'm against wars. Keith's against wars. We brought up our kids to be against wars. We're against killing. Life, you only live once. It should be only love. Only love instead of hate. And it's just such a pity that I don't know how many people in Gaza hate. And all their life is to hate instead of love. I just don't understand that. And of course, I want every human being that's got a heart, every mother that has children, to go to sleep and not worry about their children. When I look at my grandchildren that have to live their lives knowing where Keith was and hearing my story, because I don't keep quiet, because I want everybody to know what Keith is going through and the hostages are going through, to live their life. They've got a whole life to live with these terrible stories. It shouldn't be like that. It should not be like that. Their teachers that taught them to hate like that, the people in Gaza, the terrorists, are the worst teachers in earth. Because they've taken their life into such a terrible, terrible place.
Yeah.
It's terrible. It's just terrible. I just don't understand that. And you know, I've got friends that are Muslim, and they're my best friends. And I love them for who they are, for what people they are, not because they believe. And for me to see the Thai guy that came out when they took me, after they separated me with Keith, and they took me in a car, I was just alone with the terrorists, not knowing where they're going to take me, what they're going to do to me. They stopped. And a Thai guy came into the car. He was shaking. And the only couple of words that he said, that he was underneath the ground and he didn't have any oxygen. And I remember the way he looked in my eyes. He was just so scared of what's going to happen to him now, because he doesn't understand English and he does not understand Arabic. And there's Thai guys in Gaza,
Yeah.
and a Palian guy. And there's people from all over that have, you know, like Keith, that is American.
Yeah. So many nationalities. How many grandchildren do you have altogether?
I've got 5 grandchildren that are waiting for Keith. One of them is 6 years old, and we've got these T-shirts that there's written Keith's name on it, and at the back it's written "Bring them home now," and that's what he wants to wear. So they have to go into the shower all the time for him to have another T-shirt to wear, because that's all he wants to wear. And just a couple of days ago, I asked them, my grandchildren, if they think about Keith, and they did. They said that they think about Keith, and it's a year and 2 months, and you know, he's 6 years old, and he's thinking about his grandfather. But he does see me, and he sees, and they see their mother, and my daughters, and my family. We all doing everything we can to bring Keith home, and all the hostages home.
Amen. 2 last questions. The first one is, do you have a message to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government?
Of course, I've got an answer. I'm not a politician, and I can't see Keith sitting next to me. I want Bibi Netanyahu to try and think how he would have managed if one of the people from his family would have been underneath the ground. Because if he would have seen, if there was a camera taking pictures of us, of the way we were treated and the conditions that we were in and what we went through, he wouldn't have allowed any hostage to go through what they're going through now. And I really want him to hurry up before it's too late. I want Keith alive. And I want the girls alive and all the hostages. You know, that the whole family hostage forum and all the hostage families, we like one big, huge family. If anything happens to a hostage, it's like my family.
And I guess the last question is, I shared with you before we, began recording, Lynn and I are evangelical followers of Jesus, Yeshua, and we are trying to educate and mobilize Christians in the United States, Canada, and all over the world to understand what's happening, to pray, to give financially, to all kinds of ways. Do you have any other message that you want to share? I know you describe to yourself as not religious. That's actually what I'm really interested in, but I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position, because how does a person handle this without God? But also, do you have a message that you want Christians to hear? And is there something we can be doing for you and your family and for all the hostage families? So those are my final, I know those are sort of big questions, but.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody that's trying to get the hostages out. And I want to thank even Bibi Netanyahu for everything that he's doing to try and get Keith out and the hostage out, because I do know that he's trying. And I just hope that Trump will be strong enough to get them all out as soon as possible. And I just want to thank everybody that's listening to me, and thank you personally to coming to listen to me, and to thank everybody that's praying or doing anything they can to bring Keith and all the hostages home. We really, really need you. We need your help. We need anybody's help, and I'm really here to talk for Keith, and for everybody to try and imagine what it'll be like when Keith comes home.
Well, yeah, it'll be amazing. We are praying and praying and praying, and just trying to get millions of others to keep praying, not to forget, because so much else is happening in the world and in America. But thank you for sharing your story, Aviva. Thank you for letting us come to this home and just meet some of your family, including the son that you thought that you lost, and the daughter that you say is not just Ilan but Ilani, right? My Ilan. you're so. Thank you. Thank you for letting my wife and me come and hear your story directly and share it. And we would love to do the same thing when we all get back to Israel with a TV crew and help Christians see you and see the T-shirt and see the story and maybe some family pictures and be able to visualize it also. And we would like to cover the moment that you and your husband are finally reunited. We just pray that that's really what's going to happen. Yeah, soon. Soon. Amen. Amen. Thank you. Bless you. We are praying for you. And we're grateful to you. Amen. Wow. I personally have never had a conversation like that with anyone. I've interviewed a lot of people who are on the front lines. I've been in Gaza. And I've heard the things like this shared by the other hostages that have been released or rescued. But I haven't personally sat with someone like this in my whole life. I'm going to pitch it to you, Lynn. What were you thinking? What were you feeling as we were sitting, listening to Aviva, and as you're listening to it now?
Mostly, I wanted to just listen, and I was just praying the whole time. Something I pray often, that the Lord would use even just my eyes and my face to communicate love to her and care. There's no words. There's nothing that you could say to make it better. There's nothing you could do to rescue them. We can pray. And she really appreciated the fact that we would pray and that Christians would pray and that we would pray for them. But
right. Let me just say that we didn't do that while we were recording, but afterwards, as we just had some additional time with her and her daughter, Ilan, we felt moved to just at least ask, may we pray? Not everyone that we've met who've gone through October 7th in those border communities and stuff have wanted us to pray. We don't just assume it, right?
Yeah.
You had an experience, Lynn, where somebody was really quite harsh with you and those who are
right.
Don't pray for me.
Right. No, I would never just pray for someone without asking if it'd be okay. There's a wound, there's a part of her life, her heart, her soul that's still wounded, not only from what she's gone through, but it's an open wound of her husband every morning waking up and realizing afresh, my husband is living through a hellish situation, that he's struggling to breathe. He has broken ribs. He is alone. He doesn't even have me there like they were together, which is also was something I'm grateful for, in a sense that they had those 54 days together. Many of the couples, whether they were, dating couples, fiancés, got separated, families got separated, and they were together and moved around so much, but
13 times. Wow.
But now she knows she's not there to say a comforting word to him, to encourage him. He's just alone, and she's in great, great pain. And so
she, it struck me, one of the things that she said, I'm not out, I'm there.
Right.
Yes, she technically is out, right? But she's there in those tunnels, and also the other things. One of the interesting things of all the places that they were moved to, often she said, I hope people caught this, that they were moved to buildings where missiles were being fired at Israel, and so they were being used as human shields. That Israeli intelligence would probably see. They wouldn't know that they were hostages, but they would see that there was civilians in the building and they might not attack, or that maybe Hamas was trying to draw fire so that Israel would end up killing people that were hostages. I don't know, but how terrifying would that be?
Right. No, and I mean, she just said every day, she thought every day this could be our last day. We're definitely dying. We're dying soon. So to live with that reality is something I can't obviously understand. So we hugged her so many times, and she was so sweet. She was so gracious and lovely. She has hope. She's baffled by how there can be such evil in the world. You know, she and her husband lived there hoping for peace with their neighbors, you know, believing in peace with their neighbors, learning Arabic. And
Right.
it's crushing for people to not be able to understand why can't we just live together? Yeah.
Where does this evil come from? It really, uh,
Yeah.
it's hard even for us believers who look at the scripture to think of this type of evil in our lifetime,
Mhm.
impacting people that we know or that we meet. But so there were. I just want to close by saying there were a number of other questions that we would have loved to ask her, but there's only so much time. You don't want to overstay your welcome, and there's some things that Lynn and I were talking about on the drive away. Just one of the things we would love to know is I wonder, what was it like when she had to leave? What were those final moments like? What would you say to each other?
Mhm.
You were saying to me, Lynn, what would you said you wouldn't even want to leave, and I said I appreciate that, but I would make you leave. I would say, look, we have children, you have a life that you need to go take this message, whatever. If I was allowed to even say these things, but I wouldn't insist that you leave. Right? We were supposed to choose life,
Mhm.
so if you can get out of a situation, get out. But yes, how hard to leave. These two have known each other since they were teenagers, right?
Yeah.
And that's a very sweet story too. And well, I hope that everyone has had a chance to listen to this process. Please share this podcast with family and friends on social media. Share your own reaction to this on social media. Let people know, because this is a powerful story, and it's a live story. It's ongoing, and until all these hostages are released, we cannot let this story go. We have to keep telling the truth, and we have to keep mobilizing everyone we can. And that's part of the educational mission of the Joshua Fund is
Mhm.
we're going to bless Israel and her neighbors. This, to be able to sit with a family that is going through this is,
Yeah.
I mean, we were blessed, but I hope that we were a comfort to her as well. Anyway, Lynn, you want any final words, any final thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
Only to be praying for them, I think, and to be praying for their kids. They have 4 grown kids, and we met some of them, and they have grandkids, I think 6 grandchildren, and pray for those little grandchildren. I think about that little boy, the one grandson that's 6, I think, and he doesn't want to wear any other shirt except the shirt with the picture of his grandfather on it. I think just praying for that whole family, that the Lord would move to comfort them and to show them his love.
Yes, absolutely. And please also pray that the Lord would show us as a couple and certainly the Joshua and team, are there other ways that we can comfort a family like this and other families? What more can we do as people who love the Lord and are called to serve him and to bring, take the comfort that he's given us and try to comfort others? Well, thank you, Lynn. Thank you for coming with me to that invitation. I'm grateful that we were even in the States, that someone knew that we were in the States. I have asked over the past year, the Hostage Family Forum, if there were people I could interview that had been released, and they wanted to say yes, but people weren't ready to talk.
Mhm.
So I didn't know that they knew we were in DC, but I appreciated them reaching out. So, well, thank you. I will say as we close that if you have an ability to make a year-end donation to the Joshua Fund, I'm not ashamed to ask that you consider giving, because this is exactly the type of work that we're doing, both educating and comforting and humanitarian relief and strengthening the local pastors so that they can be the hands and feet of the Lord every single day, caring for those who are struggling through this terrible, terrible time, and blessing the neighbors as well. So we appreciate it. We're not trying to use any emotional tactic or anything. Give, don't give, but we just want you to know that there are needs to care for people and help this ministry keep going with all the dramatically expanded needs that have come before us this year. So if you're able to give a year-end donation, we appreciate that very much.
Mm-hmm.
If not, then don't feel badly. If the Lord leads, then he'll provide for you, and he'll certainly provide for the Joshua as he always has. Lynn, thank you so much for going through this unique moment with me. And I'm so glad we could share it with others, that God has given us this platform. And thank you, everyone. May God bless you and give you a wonderful week. And we'll keep you posted, and we look forward to you joining us on the next edition of Inside.
I'm Joel Rosenberg. On your left, you'll find some videos we've chosen specifically for you. We look forward to partnering with you to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus.